Well, it seems a long-awaited bunch of tinkering around the edges and gimmicks, quite frankly. I see a budget that talks about an awful lot of things, lots of little bits and pieces, but nothing that really does the kind of preparation that we want to see for a post-Brexit Britain. And by failing to prepare, he is preparing to fail.
And we've seen that he's set aside £3 billion for the next 2 years on Brexit. He's already spent £700 million. I mean, is that enough? Where would you like to see that spent, do you think?
Well, what we need to start doing is thinking about what policies we can enact as a nation once we leave the European Union, because there's a whole swathe of European Union legislation which affects everything that we do in this country, what laws we can have, what taxes we have to impose on people. So what I'd like to see is something a little bit more ambitious for a Chancellor. I mean, looking at something like VAT, for example, which is a hugely bureaucratic, hugely complex tax. And we have to keep that whilst we're in the European Union. So should we not be actually looking at preparing to replace that with a sales tax? This is a lot simpler.
So you'd want him to set aside more money than I take?
So well, it's not necessarily in terms of money, it's in terms of actually ambition. It's in terms of setting out in a budget how you plan to exploit Brexit to the advantage of people in this nation, and we're not doing that at the moment. I don't see any real vision, any real imagination from this government. You know, all we're hearing about is problems of Brexit, of how much money we're going to throw at this, throw at that, throw at the other, throw at a divorce bill. I want us to stop talking about how we're throwing money at something and actually start talking about how we can get some added value out of Brexit, how we plan for that.
We've seen that the forecast for GDP is markedly down over the next few years. Well, what do you make of that?
I think what we've got at the moment, we do have, and it's quite it's quite reasonable to admit that we do have a period with a certain amount of uncertainty, and there is going to be that uncertainty until we work out what we are doing post-Brexit. So what I'd like to see is a government that is not just looking at our future trading relationship with the European Union. Yes, that's important, but we should actually be starting now to look at trade deals with countries around the world. And one of the reasons that the UK is finding itself in what it's seeing as such a poor position in negotiations with the European Union is that it isn't getting on and negotiating trade deals with third countries. If you negotiate those trade deals with countries around the world now and make it very clear, very visible, very public that you're doing that, then you're less reliant on the European Union. And so we need to be starting to motor in terms of our relationships elsewhere. Give business that sense of confidence that we're actually doing something. But if you don't give business a sense of confidence that you're doing anything, what do you expect is going to happen? You're going to see this uncertainty. You deal with uncertainty by creating certainty. And that's not what this government's doing.
Phillip Hammond's kind of rabbit out of the hat, as it were, was to do with housing. And he said that around 300,000 new houses will be built year on year on average for the next few years. I mean, is this enough to solve the problem? Should we not maybe be thinking more about ending mass migration? Would that not solve the problem of the housing crisis a bit better?
Well, mass migration is one of the biggest drivers of the need for housing. You're talking roughly 70% of the drive for need for additional housing is coming from mass migration. So of course we need a controlled immigration system in this country. But also the amounts of money that he's promising. You think £44 billion over 5 years, that's £8.8 billion a year. Raising income tax or lowering income tax by a penny in the pound is round about 4 billion. So this is the equivalent of 2 pence in the pound on income tax. That is absolutely staggering as an amount of money that we're talking about here. It is a huge, huge amount of money. Now, if you're wanting to do something about house building, then you could do a lot worse than looking at the UKIP manifesto, which actually talked about house building and talked about ways that we could build new, modular, eco-friendly homes that would be ring-fenced to make sure that it's for first-time buyers, for young people to get on the housing market, admittedly with some restrictions, because the idea is that they're there for future generations. But we set out a way of building 500,000 homes a year for a fraction of the cost of what the Chancellor is throwing at this. So it just seems to me to be incredibly poor value for money.
And just lastly, there was a glaring omission from his budget announcement today, and that was to do with the police and with the defence spending as well. So you can only assume that it means it's going to be bad news that was buried in the budget. What do you make of defence cuts and police cuts at a time when Britain's at its most vulnerable from terror and from a surge in violent crime?
Well, the first duty of a nation has to be to defend itself. If you're not going to defend yourself as a nation, whether that's from threats from abroad or whether that's from threats from within, then you run serious risks as to your future, and it sends out completely the wrong message. You know, we have to send out the message that we're prioritising defence, that we're prioritising security and intelligence. You know, we are supposed to be global leaders. We're members of the Five Eyes network. We should be offering, actually, when it comes to the European Union negotiations, we should be offering something fantastic to the European Union, and yet that's one of the first things that Theresa May conceded, was say, oh, of course, we're going to work with the European Union on all these things. That should have been a big bargaining chip for us, which we just handed over on day one before we even started negotiations. But if we want to remain world leaders, then good grief, don't we need to fund it?
Jonathan Arnott, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.